Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to talk about a little known UFO incident that took place in Kofu, Japan. And I'll be reading from Lauren Dillon's article, The Terrifying Aliens of Japan's Kofu Incident. Kofu is the capital city of Yamanashi Prefecture, Japan. The city is located between the city of Nagoya and Tokyo and is known as a peaceful and attractive place to live. But it is also known for something else as well. The beautiful city was the site of an encounter of the third kind. Two little boys witnessed two UFOs and a strange, terrifying alien they never forgot. What was the Kofu incident, and what did the boys see? Well, the Kofu incident occurred in February of 1975. Two 7-year-old boys, Masato Kawano and Katsuhiro Yamahata, were roller skating near the Hinode housing estate in Kamimachi, Kofu, when they saw something strange in the sky. The boys said they spotted two, quote, glittering orange UFOs frolicking in the sky above, end quote. As they put it, like anyone who just saw not one, but two unidentified flying objects, the boys stood transfixed, watching the glittering UFOs dance across the sky. One UFO took off and flew towards Mount Atago in the distance. The other began to lower to the ground before finally landing amongst rows of grapes in the vineyard behind the estate. So I guess this took place at a vineyard. One strange thing the boys said was that the UFOs made a strange crackling or ticking sound. That's unusual. I've never heard that before coming from a UFO or UAP. Apparently, it was just like the sound a Geiger counter makes when reading a radioactive environment. That's interesting. Wonder whether the UFO had a Geiger counter attached to it. Anyway, as soon as the second UFO landed, the boys kicked off their skates and took off running to the back of the estate to get a closer look at the mysterious craft. The boys said that when they got closer to the UFO, they realized it wasn't orange like it appeared in the sky. Instead, it was a domed, silverish disc-shaped spacecraft. The children claimed the craft was around 7 feet or 2 meters high and almost 15 feet or 4.5 meters in diameter, with strange characters engraved onto the ship's hull. While the boys were getting a closer look, they saw a hatch open up on the side of the UFO, open, and a ladder extended onto the ground. Wow. According to the boys, one humanoid creature descended the steps, disembarking the craft. Then the shocked kids saw a smaller humanoid creature that looked like a little version of the first creature that remained in the craft, sitting in a control room for the ship. The youngsters said the first creature had unnaturally long arms and was around 4 feet or 1.2 meters tall. Okay, that usually fits the description of a gray, longish arms, about 4 feet tall. The Kofu creature was wearing a reflective uniform that made it look as if it was glowing. That's a bit unusual. The creature's skin was dark brown and covered in dense collections of wrinkles that obscured the eyes and nose of the creature. That's a little unusual, yeah. That's not exactly what a gray looks like. While most of the face was obscured with thick wrinkles. The boys did notice the creature had 3 teeth that they described as being silvery metal fangs that looked incredibly sharp. That's highly unusual, having 3 fangs. Oddly enough, this creature didn't seem to notice the 2 stunned children gawking at it, and the creature began to walk around and explore the vineyard's terrain. Maybe the creature could feel the boy's eyes burning into its back, but it froze, spun around, and, quote, put one of its hands, end quote, on Katsuhiro Yamahata's shoulder before patting it twice. Okay, that must have been shocking for poor little Yatsuhiro. Both boys then said the creature was making sounds like a, quote, tape recorder running backwards, and Yamahata fell to the ground almost paralyzed. Okay, so these aliens are sounding somewhat robotic. They were making a, quote, tape recorder sound as though it was running backward. Although the boys were only 7 years old and were in a state of shock witnessing something not of this earth, when Yamahata dropped to the ground, his friend Masato Kawano had the presence of mind to act. He grabbed his friend off the ground, tossed him over his shoulder. Now, I would think that he probably grabbed him. Tossing him over his shoulder sounds like something maybe a grown man could do. Well, either way, it says here that he tossed him over his shoulder and then he ran away. When the boys made it home, they told their mothers what they saw, and seeing how distraught their sons were, the moms had their children take them to the site where they saw the ship. The mothers allegedly saw a strange orange pulsating light coming from within the vineyard. After watching the lights for a little bit, the UFO launched into the sky with a bright flash of light so strong the kids and their moms had to look away. Only Kawano and Yamahata actually saw the craft, but one of their friends from school, Ichiro Minegishi, who was 8 years old at the time, said he saw a glistening object in the sky that flew towards the Hinode housing estate about half an hour before the other two boys had their encounter while he was in the car with his parents. Okay, so this happened right before the two boys had their encounter. As all kids do, Kawano and Yamahata went to school the next day and told all their classmates and teachers about what they saw the night before. The boys drew pictures of the UFO and the Kofu creature that they saw, and the whole school was soon talking about the alien. Well, the school's principal, Nobuyoshi Kaneko, and some school officials decided to inspect the vineyard themselves. Okay? In an attempt to investigate fully, the school staff grabbed any scientific equipment the school had with them as they went into the vineyard. The adults noticed that there were two, quote, solid concrete posts that had been pushed over, end quote, at the landing site. The school staff investigated if the kids could have knocked the posts over and determined it was impossible. According to the investigation by the teachers, there was something they called, quote, landing traces, end quote, or soil marks and impressions where the UFO had supposedly landed. One teacher claimed there were traces of radioactivity in the landing range. How the teacher determined this is unknown. Yeah, how did he know unless he had a Geiger counter? Well, it was never mentioned if anyone brought a Geiger counter with them, it says here. The boys were also questioned thoroughly by their teacher, principal, their moms, and even notable UFO investigator Masaru Mori came and questioned them as well. Regardless of who questioned the boys, their stories remained the same. They never differed in their accounts of what happened, which I think is significant. They never changed their stories even into adulthood. The Japanese Civil Aviation Bureau of Transportation Ministry responded to the rumors of aliens and made a public statement where they claimed that what the boys saw wasn't a UFO. Instead, the ministry said that the boys actually saw the lights of a YS-11 propeller plane. And there's a picture included here of the YS-11 propeller plane, and it looks nothing like your typical UFO, or what the kids described as a domed craft. Just looks like your usual plane with some propellers on the front of the wings. Well, the Japanese Civil Aviation Bureau of Transportation Ministry claimed that sometimes these craft would fly at altitudes as low as 3,000 feet or 1,000 meters, which would make the lights and the body visible to the naked eye. Nothing was said about the fanged humanoids, so I think that was a poor explanation, trying to substitute your average-looking commercial plane for what the kids saw, and not even mentioning the humanoid ETs that they encountered. Well, the article goes on to say that the two boys returned to the landing site when they were 14 years old. Remember, they were only 7 when this happened. So 7 years later, in 1982, they returned to the site. And in 2001, the boys participated in a show where they both were hypnotized and questioned about the Kofu incident. Even all those years later, and under hypnosis, they repeated the same story they told when they were 7 years old. So in 2001, they would already be in their 30s, and they repeated the same story they told when they were 7 years old. Their story never deviated, folks. And that's where I find some of these reports to be more credible than others, when they do not deviate in what they say happened. And the article ends by Lauren Dillon saying, children have detailed and rich imaginations and even imaginary friends they play with and speak to. The boys might have made up the Kofu incident, or however, their story never shifted. They were very young when the Kofu incident occurred, and they would have had to rehearse their story repeatedly because they told the very same story every time. The boys definitely saw something strange that afternoon. And I find the description of the aliens unusual in this. You don't very often hear reports of ETs looking like this with fangs. And this is the author here, Lauren Dillon. Is a picture of her. She wrote this very interesting article. She is a freelance writer with experience working in museums, historical societies, and archives. Great job, Lauren Dillon. Now I'm going to play a video that accompanies this article.
On the 23rd of February 1975, winter was coming to an end in Japan, and the skies over Kofu City, Yamanashi Prefecture, were calm and clear. 7-year-old elementary school students Kono and Yamahata were playing together, skating around the neighborhood on their roller skates. It was just like any other evening for the two. Yamahata suddenly remembered that there was a television program that he wanted to watch, and so at around 6:30 in the evening, the two boys took off their roller skates and started to make their way home in time to see the show. They only just began their journey home when they noticed something unusual in the skies to the east. As described by the boys, high up in the sky were two very bright orange lights. The larger of the two lights whizzed off at high speeds to the north towards Mount Atago, while the smaller one descended over the city directly above the two young boys. While hovering in place, it slowly descended towards them and focused what has been described as a black tube in their direction. The tube suddenly started making sounds, which have been interpreted to be something like a camera shutter, as the end of it was pointed directly towards the two boys, who now stood motionless at the sight. After standing in place for only a few seconds, the boys thought that the tube could be a weapon and began to panic. They collected their roller skates and belongings from the floor and made a run for it. They dashed down the street and hid themselves behind some graves in the local graveyard at Fukuoji Temple. There, they waited and waited. But there was nothing. Their eyes were fixed on the sky, looking all around them to see if they'd been followed by the orange light. But it had flown away, and all that lingered was an eerie silence and a clear night sky. A few minutes later, after checking if the coast is clear, the boys sheepishly moved away from the graveyard and began to walk home once again. This particular area of the city was used for agriculture, and on their way back, they walked towards a large grape field. But something extraordinary was happening in the field. It was glowing and looked as though it was on fire. While they were still a little frightened, they decided to check it out to see if it was the UFO they had witnessed before. What they saw next was something that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. When they arrived at the grape field and walked towards the center of it, they saw what looked to be a landed flying saucer. It had a diameter of approximately 5 meters, a height of 1 to 2 meters, had 3 oval landing gears, had changed from its orange color and was now a silver-like stainless steel with a dim shine, had 5 strange, unrecognizable characters written on both sides, had a slightly tinted window near the top that wrapped completely around the dome, which was initially spinning, and a ladder or staircase with 7 steps that descended down to the ground. Almost paralyzed in shock, the boys stood and watched it, but the flying saucer was the least of their worries at this point, because something else was in the grape field that day, something seemingly not from this world. Yamahata and Kono were circling the craft at a 1-meter distance, trying to work out exactly what it was. Just when Yamahata thought about going home and to get his parents to come and take a look, they were bathed in what they described as a silver light. A door had opened on the craft, and a figure stepped outside. According to the boys, the humanoid figure stood at around 130 centimeters tall, or approximately 4 foot 3 inches. It had brown skin. It had no hair at all on any part of its body. All the way down its face were long, deep wrinkles. It seemed to have no eyes or nose. It had 3 large white fangs coming out from the top of its mouth. It had 4 fingers on each hand, which were also wrinkled and brown. It had large pointed ears with dark holes. Its clothing was shiny silver and was accompanied by a belt around the waist and what looked like a zipper along the spine. Slung over its shoulder was something that looked like a rifle that had a pointed barrel with a small trumpet-like ending around it. Its boots were divided in 2 where the toes would be on a regular person. The figure walked around the craft and came up behind Yamahata. With its right hand, it tapped him twice on the left shoulder. When he turned around, he saw it face to face. Then it began to speak to him.
顔は何色だった？
茶色。
目とか鼻ってあんのかな？
牙だけあって口はないけど、牙だけ3本あった。
牙？
手も茶色。
手も茶色。なんか宇宙人に話さなかった？
テープでその逆に回して。もっと早かった。
早い。
After hearing the voice, Yamahata fell to the floor in fear. Unable to move out of fright, he decided to play dead. At that point, the outlandish being walked around him quickly, as if it were studying him. Kono, looking at the situation, screamed to Yamahata, "Let's get out of here." But Yamahata couldn't move, and with all his might he screamed back, "I can't." Kono went pale with fear, but mustered the courage to pick up his friend and they both fled. As they ran past the craft, they looked inside the door that the being had left from and saw another humanoid inside. It was sat in front of some controls and what looked like a television. As they ran out of the grapevine and realized that they were being followed, they looked back at the being inside the craft once more to get a better view. The inside was full of what looked like control panels, so much of the interior was rather cramped. You could not see inside the craft through the window from the outside, but you could the other way around, meaning that it was like a one-way mirror. The being inside the craft turned towards the boys, and it was then when they finally ran home. The boys ran to Kono's house after gathering their parents there. They both made quite a scene in the house, claiming to have seen a UFO and aliens. Their parents, obviously extremely doubtful of their story, tried to refute their claims and get them to sit down and eat dinner, but after seeing how pale and panicked they were, they became a little concerned and decided to go and see what all the fuss was about. To their amazement, the craft was still there, but now it had turned back to its orange color and was spinning while flashing bright lights every 5 to 10 seconds.
じゃあもうお母さん見た時には、オレンジ色に光ったわけ。
そうなんです。すごいオレンジ色なの。なんかね、花火のね、光見てっていう感じでね、パーッとこっちが光ってね。
だからそれがくるくる回転。
そうそうそう、きっと回転数がこうチカチカチカチカこうね。
Yamahata's mother decided to get closer to the craft to get a better look, but the boys protested and even held them back, screaming that there were aliens and that they would be taken away. The mothers, seeing that the boys were being truthful, decided to go and get the fathers. They too arrived at the scene, but by that point the craft was nearly gone. What I mean by that is, the craft didn't fly away exactly, but instead blinked while shrinking in size. It got smaller and smaller, and with a final bright light, ascended slightly as it disappeared, never to be seen again. Now in complete darkness under the evening sky, the families walked home from the grape field. The parents, seeing that their children were traumatized by the experience, tried to console them. The mothers tried to explain that what they saw was probably a hitodama, or spirit of a human being that glows like fire at night. But both children had a difficult evening that day. Kono cried all night and was unable to sleep, and Yamahata couldn't leave the home by himself the next day to go to school and had to walk with his mother. This, however, was not the end of the story. The next day, on the 24th of February, the two boys went to school and noticed something that made them very surprised. On the wall of the corridor was a drawing of the UFO that they saw yesterday. After talking to some of their classmates, they discovered that another boy had seen the UFO too. This boy, then 8 years old, had seen a bright light in the sky while riding in the back seat of his family car on the Kofu bypass, about 30 minutes before the two boys first saw the object. The three boys spoke of this incident and informed their teacher. The teacher believed the story was absolutely ridiculous, but saw in their faces that they were not lying. She decided to inform the school principal of the incident. The principal then called the local Yamanashi Nichi newspaper, and together the two teachers and some journalists went down to the grape field. When they arrived at the field, they found many peculiar things. First of all, a concrete column in the field had completely toppled over and broken, and a steel net overhead had been warped as if something heavy had rested on top of it. Two more concrete pillars had been damaged, and on the ground were numerous holes, in an area which the boys later said was where the UFO had landed. Another curious onlooker at the site also found a hole in the ground measuring around 50 to 60 centimeters, and what looked like white ash in the center of it. It appeared that something had indeed been in the field after all. But perhaps the most damning piece of evidence that something truly happened that day is the result of a series of tests carried out on the soil directly where the UFO supposedly landed. A few days after the incident, Professor Maeda from the Yamanashi Prefectural Industrial High School came to the site and took soil samples. After testing them, he discovered that there was a high amount of radiation, far more than what appears naturally in the world. A few other experts in the area corroborated the professor's findings, and theorized that the radiation must have come from a foreign object coming into contact with the soil, whether that was a UFO, a meteorite, or piece of radioactive material from a nuclear bomb test. So now there was not only testimony from the elementary school boys and their parents, but also physical evidence at the scene. But the eyewitness reports didn't stop there. After journalists and police conducted interviews in the area, they discovered that more people had seen something strange that day. About 500 meters away from Kono's house, the manager of Kofu's environmental center saw a yellow flickering light in the sky. His dog had been barking unusually when he went over to see what all the fuss was about, only to notice a yellow light whiz across the sky and leave a trail behind it. The light then disappeared behind some buildings. It was too quick to be a plane, so the man thought it was a shooting star. The 59-year-old high priest of Jokoji Temple also saw a bright light zigzagging across the sky at high speeds, before shrinking and disappearing into the night, while a young girl saw a strange light in the sky from the balcony of her apartment, very close to where the boys saw the light. But the most interesting sighting was revealed to the public 7 years after the incident in 1982, when a late-night news show called 11 PM received a letter from an insurance saleswoman called Midori. She had originally kept silent about her sighting over fear of being ridiculed, but after many people said she should come forward, she decided to contact the news program. This is what she had to say.
ドンドンっていうね、花火かなんかの音を聞いたんですね。そして少し進んできますと、ちょうど境目の十字路のところに男の子が2人立っていて、ちょうど1メーター30か40ぐらいの中学生かなと思うような男の子が立っていて、顔が真っ黒だったんですね、遠くから見てね。それで同人の仮装かなんかしてるのかななんてね思いながらクラクション鳴らしましたんですけどね、どかないんですよね。ですぐそばまで来まして、またクラクション鳴らしたんですけどどかないんですよね。おかしいなと思いながら、私も集金で急いでましてね、浴衣になっちゃ困ると思って、それでそばまで行ってみたらすごい黒い感じの子で、それで私のフロントガラスでペタッとこう手をつけたんですよね、で中からこう見えましてね、で真っ黒の手なんですよね。それでシワが寄っていてね、全部こう手のひらにシワがこうまっすぐ寄っていて、こういう目線とか線目線とかって人間の手相みたいなのがないんですよね。そしてちょっと手首が見えましたらね、手首が亀さんの首みたいな感じでね、シワシワなんですよ、黒くて。そして顔も見えたんですよね、フロントガラスからだから7、80センチぐらいのとこで見えたんですよね、そしたらその顔がね、また目が印象的でね、目が下がまっすぐでね、でこんもりした目ですね。それでまぶたがすごくこうくしゃくしゃにね幾重にもなって、で目も鼻もありましたね。それであっと思ってね、その間5秒か6秒ぐらいの間ですよね、それで手といいその顔といい、もう他のとこ見るなんていう余裕がなかったですね。びっくりしすぎちゃってね。
From Midori's description of the beings, we can find both similarities and differences between the boys' descriptions. First, both parties described the beings as having deep wrinkles on their faces and hands, dark skin, were of short stature, and having touched the person that came into contact with them. However, Midori describes the beings as having eyes and a nose, hair, 5 fingers, and regular or no ears. Of course, she and the boys only saw the beings for a very short amount of time in the dark, so it is understandable that there are going to be a few differences. Plus, it had been 7 years since Midori saw the beings. Regardless of what is true or not, it seems that something strange was going on. As mentioned previously, there were strange characters on 2 sides of the craft. The boys wrote down these symbols when they drew the images for the journalists and policemen. First of all, let's look at Kono's drawing. These characters are very similar to kanji, or Chinese characters adopted by Japan. The first character looks like Suki, meaning moon. The second looks like Nichi, meaning sun. The third looks a little like Hi, meaning fire, or Mizu, meaning water. The fourth character is a little more difficult, but we can easily recognize Dai, meaning large. The fifth character is a mystery, but when Kono drew it while under hypnosis in this TV show at the age of 33, it looks similar to the hiragana character, Ri. The first three could refer to celestial objects in space, but could also refer to days of the week. As for Yamahata's writings, we can see that it somewhat follows the English alphabet. While written backwards, it seems to start with A, B, and C, before ending more like a scribble towards the end. Maybe there was both Japanese and English on the craft, but due to the strange font or darkness, they couldn't read them clearly. Or maybe the boys subconsciously used their knowledge of Japanese and English to create patterns and fill in the blanks when seeing writing they didn't understand. In any case, the writing is quite intriguing. Another thing that sticks out to me is the description of the beings. Some Japanese people have pointed out how closely they resemble characters from Ultraman. This was a very popular show during the 1960s and 70s, and both of these characters appeared in it. As you can see for yourself, they look very similar to the drawings the boys created during their questioning. They have pointed ears, fangs, wrinkles, and shiny clothing. Could the boys have seen something else, and again let their imaginations run wild? And their descriptions do fall into common tropes of the time period. It could also be possible that the two boys saw a farm worker spreading pesticides or fertilizer. As you can see from these images, Japanese farm workers often wear shiny protective clothing, cover their faces, and use a spray that, when slung over the shoulder, could look like some kind of weapon in the dark. These workers also wear jikatabi shoes, which split at the toe like the drawings. I guess he could have been wearing a mask when he saw the boys, and then taken it off when walking down the street when he encountered Midori in her car, which is why she saw his eyes and nose. Maybe the farmer didn't come forward because he was worried about all the press coverage and UFO enthusiasts that had shown up in the area, so kept it to himself. As for the craft, maybe it was a small truck or trailer that contained the fertilizer that the farmer was using, and maybe it had an orange light on the top. As I have said many times, it was quite dark and the children were very scared at the time, but it could have been an honest case of misinterpretation of certain events. Another thing to consider is the weather and the sky. According to the Japanese Meteorological Agency, on the day of the incident, the sky was very clear. There was no rain. There was a very weak northern wind, and the stars were plainly visible in the sky. Furthermore, Venus and Jupiter were also visible to the west, and according to the Ministry of Transport, YS-11 planes were flying over the sky, which have powerful blinking tail lights. Could all these people have seen the planets or these planes on the clear evening sky and thought they were UFOs? What we do know is, as previously mentioned, there was a higher than normal radiation reading in the area and physical damage in the field. Furthermore, many of the witnesses were respectable people. One was a government official, another was a high priest, and the other a successful businesswoman. In Japan, lying about such an event would bring about a lot of ridicule, so it doesn't make sense that they would simply lie. And if they did lie, what benefit would they get from it? They only had a couple of interviews, and tourism wasn't really a thing in that area of the city. It's easy to imagine a couple of 7-year-olds making up such a story, but the fact that they have kept to their stories almost 50 years later adds a bit of weight to them. They had interviews at 14 years old where they revisited the site, underwent separate hypnosis sessions at 33 years old, and held other televised interviews at 50 years old. It seems strange that they would continue to lie like this. They were also interviewed separately during their initial questioning by police and journalists when they were still very young. Their stories and drawings were extremely similar to one another. It is very hard to believe that these children had the foresight to plan ahead of time so that they could fool the police or something. Some of you may be wondering what the owner of the grape field had to say about the incident. Well, so is everyone else. Because the owner was never interviewed, nor did they give a statement about the event. There was clear damage in the field and it became swarmed with journalists and police at one point, so it's hard to believe the owner would not have been aware of the situation. Some have theorized that the owner was angry about all the attention on his farm, so refused to speak to press. Japanese people are very private and don't like to get involved in affairs such as this. Also, because high levels of radiation were found in the field, it could lead to a loss in business, so perhaps the owner felt like it would be better not to draw attention to themselves. But now, after all these years, we will probably never know the answer.
This case is certainly strange, and I'm not sure what I personally think about it. I do believe in ETs and NHI on other planets, but this report lends itself to a lot of skepticism. I think over the years, this report has become very convoluted. Something strange absolutely did happen that night, that's for sure. But maybe things got a little crazy due to misunderstandings and hysteria. Anyway, I thought that case was worth putting on the podcast since I had never heard of it, and I'm imagining that a lot of you guys haven't heard of it either. It's also unique because of the writing on the craft, which may or may not be Chinese symbols indicating the moon and the sun. And what Yamahata and Kono saw was undoubtedly not a farmer spreading pesticides. They indicated wrinkles, no eyes or nose, 4 fingers, and pointed ears. And given the fact that there were characters that were popular back then on Japanese TV that had those characteristics, it could be that they let their imaginations run a little bit wild. But let's not forget that they were witnesses besides Yamahata and Kono. The parents saw the craft itself. The mothers actually saw the craft on the ground, and the fathers, which came in afterward, saw the craft leaving, or as was described in the video, it blinked and shrank and then all of a sudden disappeared. There was a classmate that also saw the craft right before the incident with Yamahata and Kono. There was radioactivity found on the ground on the landing site. And let's not forget Midori, the female witness that years later testified that she had seen 2 alien-type creatures in the road, and when she stopped, they came up to her windshield. Now, the descriptions were slightly different, but be that as it may, the height and the wrinkledness of the skin matched up. Could be that the 2 boys didn't see the eyes and the nose due to the distance and because of the wrinkles. I also thought the report was interesting because no one, as far as I know, tried to cash in on this UFO encounter. As far as I know, there was never a book written. Only up until recently has anyone tried to cash in on the Kofu alien incident. I came across this on the Kyodo News, and the headline reads, "Locals in central Japan near Mount Fuji count on UFO craze for tourism." So apparently the residents there in the Yamanashi prefecture are striving to make their city, Kofu, a tourist magnet for anyone interested in extraterrestrials, UAPs, or NHI. And next year will mark the 50th anniversary of the Kofu incident, where the Yamahata and Kono claim to have encountered an unidentified flying object and an alien. And this is a promotional picture that they've taken. It's become a tourist destination now for any UFO researchers or anyone interested in ufology. So 49 years later, the town of Kofu is trying to cash in on the Kofu incident. That's a long time. So that to me gives it a bit more credibility and also is something to do if you're an UAP or a UFO enthusiast and you happen to find yourself in Japan. And the local organizers of this Kofu Alien Incident Festival are planning to erect a monument at the site that says, "My hope is visitors interested in the UFO incident will take a liking to the city of Kofu and its people." So February the 23rd is now registered as Kofu UFO Day by the Japanese Anniversary Association. That's it for me. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you happen to find yourself in Japan, don't forget that Kofu is just at the foot of Mount Fuji, and there'll be a festival there February the 23rd every year to commemorate the incident. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks. Thanks for listening to my podcast.